Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Now, the conference is over. The virtual conference, our first virtual conference is over. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you feel more empowered? Was it not for you? This is what this episode is all about. And we have an absolute stellar cast of luminaries to talk about this. So returning one of our longest serving contributors to the podcast is Lisa Smart. Welcome back to the podcast, Lisa.
Very good to be here, John. Nice to see you.
And also returning one of our regulars is Laura Gordon from Sheffield. Hi, Laura.
How are you? Thank you for having me.
Very, very good. No conference cold, so it's already an upside to the normal physical conference. And we have two people join us for their very first appearance on the podcast. We have Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham. Hi, Sam.
Hello there. Hi. Just to introduce myself, councillor, was a PPC last time out, and I get involved in far too many things. This is being one.
And we're a very special welcome to the chair of the Federal Conference Committee, Geoff Payne, whose shoulders had the heavy weight of putting on this conference along with the rest of his team. So welcome to the podcast, Geoff. We really appreciate you coming on.
No, it's my pleasure. And my shoulders feel considerably lighter now, John, than they did before. So thank you for having me.
And I think first of all, let's do a very quick test. I personally believe it was a success. I was genuinely impressed with the tech. I wasn't sure how I felt going into it, to the point where I thought, we do so many Zoom meetings this day. Do we really want to have a whole weekend full of it? And actually, I quite enjoyed myself. How does everyone else think? Geoff, you probably have to stay neutral on this one.
Well, I'll listen to the views, but we've been really bowled over by the positive comments that we've had from all sorts of quarters. So we're really, really grateful for that.
What about you, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have to admit, I booked the ticket for the conference largely as a gesture of solidarity. You kind of feel like when FCC has worked so hard and the conference department staff have worked so hard to make it happen, you have to sort of show willing. But I was genuinely surprised. Like, I thought, like you, I thought it would be a lot of kind of Zoom calls that just would be a little bit depressing, but you kind of have to do it. But no, I mean, it was fantastic. I thought the debates were excellent. I went to a few fringe meetings, which were all, brilliant. There was a sort of networking speed dating type feature, which again, I was quite cynical about. I thought it would be quite cringy, but I did a couple of those. And actually I had some really nice chats with people that I probably wouldn't have met otherwise. So no, I'm a big fan. And I think huge congratulations are due to everybody who worked so hard to make it happen.
Yeah, big thanks to everybody who put in a shift, and there were some people who put in several back-to-back shifts, I think, so definite thanks. One of the things, so I definitely don't have my conference hangover, and I'm definitely much better off financially than I otherwise would have been. I didn't see my mates, though. I didn't have the chat in the bar about how they were doing, and you can't replicate that online, you just can't. But it's probably not fair to try and compare virtual conference with in-person conference. The alternative was no conference at all. And virtual conference absolutely stormed it compared to no conference at all.
Sam, what are your impressions of conference in general? And obviously you're quite a tech savvy guy as well.
I am, although I was rather trapped by being on the Welsh coast for the weekend, and the place where I was staying had absolutely no internet connection. So I was very much skimming the top of it and trying to keep track of what was going. So not perfect, but that was entirely my own fault for enjoying a weekend in Carnarvon at the same time. I think the biggest thing for me is, and especially when I started out at my first conference, I turned up as a local representative from Macclesfield, where we didn't really have a local party, and it was really overfacing. I didn't know anybody there. There were 3,000 people in a room. I didn't know how it worked, and I didn't know anything. And actually, there's an element of it almost being a bit of a leveler, because everybody's kind of like, this is a first time for everyone. And so actually, I think on that level, it might have been much easier for somebody who's a newcomer to conference to just kind of be finding their way around, because everybody else is. So there's a really good experience for everyone in remembering what it is to be like a first timer at how this works.
And so, Geoff, I mean, what kind of statistics did we get from the actual event? That's probably a good place for us to start our discussion. What were the general attendances? How did it go? Were there lots of first timers actually turning up to this one?
Yeah, we had a lot of first timers, and what was noticeable were the number of speakers cards that came in from first timers, and that was something we were really pleased to see. And we do make an effort, conference chairs, to call first time speakers where we can, because that's a good introduction. We had around 3,200 people on the platform. Our highest attendance was, I think, the Europe debate, where we had about 1,600 people tuning in, which compares very favourably to auditorium debates. I can't remember many auditorium debates where we've come anywhere close to that sort of figure. So we were overwhelmed with that. Someone told me that if you total up the amount of time that all of the members spent on hopping collectively, it would come to well over 5 years. And we have well over 21,000 votes cast on the platform that long weekend. So overall, we were really happy with the attendance figures. It was something like 2,600, 2,700 party members, something of that order, which compares extremely well to the physical conferences, and in fact is an improvement on many of the physical conferences.
I'll tell you, some of the things I quite like doing. I mean, I put a post on Twitter about it, that I could do other things in the background as well. So I like some of the debates that were going on, I put a joke that I was preparing my Sunday roast. But actually, it was actually quite nice to dip in and out quite easily for me and do that. I think Laura, you put on. I think you were having at one point. You just had a stroll, or you went up and did a bit of a walk at some point. Just been able to almost refresh the batteries, which I think is very important when it was a virtual one. But the only other one I actually quite liked as well, the ability to dip in and out of different things. So you know, when you go to a conference and you go to a fringe, and there's a mad scramble to get the final seat, and it's always at the front, so you can't leave once you've got there. This was I could dip in. Okay, I've been to the education debate. Okay, that's quite interesting. And then I maybe stay there or go and do the one on the rail transport system or something like that. I quite enjoyed that. I don't know what everyone else thought.
Yeah, agreed.
Probably you weren't rude by leaving. You didn't think, oh, I've heard the person on this panel that I was interested in hearing, I can now sneak out. Whereas that it's much more obvious when you're in person. So yeah, I really enjoyed that feature of it, definitely.
I teach improvisation, and when we do improvisation conferences, there's a thing called the rule of 2 feet, which is exactly that. And it's established at the start of everything, which is if anyone turns up, if it's the wrong place for them, you use your 2 feet and you go, and that's okay. It's not an insult. It's just accepting that this happened to be not the place for you. And I think establishing that is such a good thing for any conference. And the fact that it kind of, as Lisa says, reduces that barrier, just makes it a bit easier to do that. But I think even in person, it'd be a really nice thing to just introduce that idea of going, yeah, some things are not for you, not this time, and that's nothing to do with what's going on in it. That should be in every conference, I think.
I'm interested, Geoff, to ask, did it make money, this conference?
Did it make money? Well, the answer is yes, it did. It did. I've got to say, a week out, it didn't. We genuinely, when we started this, we had no idea what people would be prepared to pay. And, you know, our conference organizer, who's well connected in the events industry, she did some asking around, and we came up with the £40 figure for non-concessions and the £10 claimant figure, really. Doing the best we could based on the limited market experience we have. We thought, look, people are normally prepared to pay a tenner a month for Apple Music or Netflix or something like that. So we thought it's probably a bit more value than that. So really, we just did the best we could with the figures. So yes, we are in a profit position for the event, but I guess what I'd say are 2 points arising out of that. The first is that the party does depend on conference revenue. We've always wanted to make a contribution to wider party activity, campaigning and the like from conference. That's an important mission for us. And the second thing is that the party has suffered, obviously, really significant losses from the cancellation of Spring Conference and the movement of Brighton to an online conference. And so what we've managed to do are claw back some of those losses. And those are losses caused by the pandemic. I've no doubt it was absolutely right to cancel those 2 physical conferences. But we're really pleased that what we've been able to do are claw back some of those losses. Was £40 the right ticket price? Well, I guess people will tell us. Obviously, if people were turned off from paying that, then that was too high. But on the other hand, if we'd set it lower, I think we would have been in a loss-making position. So we just had to do the best we could, really. It's a very difficult thing, not having ever done this before.
I wonder, I mean, what other things did we enjoy on the conference? For me, I enjoyed the Lib Dem speed dating, which was actually called the networking side. I did that in my first. My wife thinks I'm bonkers anyway for liking to speak to people who I've never spoke to before. But I had some absolutely stellar conversations in that, and I love the fact it was limited to 4 minutes. You just go in and speak to a random person. I thought, did anyone else do that, or was that just me?
No, I did that as well, and I agree. I thought it was great because it's always a physical conference. There's always like slightly the fear that you'll kind of get trapped with someone in a corner at the bar and like not be able to escape for an hour, and that's like your whole conference gone. So you kind of sometimes you're a bit wary of kind of sort of starting to get into in-depth conversations with new people, which is a shame because like you, it's something that I really enjoy. And I think for a lot of people who are in politics, it's because we like talking to people, we like meeting new people, we like finding out things about them. But then, at the same time, like Lisa says, you're kind of at physical conference, you're there in the bar, you want to see your mates. And so there's that kind of tension. But no, I really enjoyed it. I had some really interesting conversations with people that I probably wouldn't have met otherwise. So no, I really like that feature, even though, as I said at the beginning, I did do it with some trepidation and thought it would be quite cringy, but it was actually really good.
I wonder if that takes us to the chat function, because I think there were some people who made their presence felt via the chat function. It wasn't, I think different people will have seen it differently. So for some people who follow 6,000 people on Twitter, it will have felt very familiar. For other people who don't sit on social media the whole time, there was a lot there. Was that a success, do you think, Geoff?
I think it's mixed. We ummed and ahed about the chat, to be honest. On the one hand, we thought we don't normally allow that sort of matter in the auditorium. We normally like to listen to speakers in silence. But then again, we thought, look at the number of people that leave the auditorium and go and have a chat with their mates in the coffee bar or the bar, and then come back. And what we were really concerned about was the event being flat. We really didn't want to have speaker after speaker after speaker just not interacting, not responding to their points that had been made before. And so we thought, how do we liven this up and make it a bit more spontaneous? And I think the chat really worked in that regard. We had, by and large, I think the overwhelming majority of comments were supportive and constructive. We had to moderate a little bit, but not very much. We had a pretty efficient team of moderators on it. As I say, there was some concern about it. But overall, I thought it was a success, actually, because it did add that spontaneity that I think we otherwise would have lacked a bit. And it was lovely to sit there and see names that you recognise going up the chat. I mean, maybe that's just me when I've been sort of around for 100 years, but we didn't have any complaints, or very few complaints about it overall. And I think by and large, people were respectful and used it positively. I'd be interested to hear what others think.
Well, I can use this as a handy plug for you as well, because the only comment I made on chat on your survey that you've emailed out to people, and I'd recommend people who have gone to conference do fill out that, because Geoff and the conference committee want our feedback, is that the chat was so quick. I mean, it literally was, at some points between the Euro, it was like, and it flew up like that, and so you couldn't see anything. Yeah. The only thing I got a bit frustrated was there were people replying to other people, and because it went at such a speed, I had no idea what they were replying to. So some sort of, like you do on WhatsApp or Messenger or something like that, where you have a reply function, so then it kind of puts a little ghost of what they're actually replying to. I think that would have been useful, but generally, again, it gave a sense of immediacy to the debates, and I thought it was generally a success, the chat. I didn't really have any problem with it.
Hopin's a very new platform. In fact, earlier in the year, it was far more embryonic than it is now, and they haven't got the facility to thread chats at the moment. It's something that is coming out in the feedback quite a bit, and we'll raise it with people. One thing that I think would have been good as well is a sort of reaction box, so that you can press to applause or press to do a smiley face or whatever, rather than have people saying agree, just sort of churning up. It's funny, you're right about the speed of the chat in the Europe debate. I was sort of watching it, and almost, literally, it was a very, very difficult to keep pace with it.
Can we talk? Sorry, Lisa, are you going to come in?
I suppose I've got a question then about how the chat. Jeff, you talked about moderation there and how it wasn't used frequently, but it was used in terms of moderating comments that people had put on the chat. And I saw something somebody had said, I think somewhere else on a different platform, about how they personally had been moderated, or their comment had been moderated. And I don't know what the comment was, so I can't say anything about that. Their comment had been moderated and I think removed. They had taken issue with something that had been said by one of the speakers in the debate. And I just wondered how you and FCC colleagues approach that, about from a freedom of speech perspective, from just thinking about debate balance, and I'm interested to hear how you and colleagues approach that issue.
We wanted to adopt a reasonably light touch approach to the moderation. The comments that we moderated, and we only took, I think, official action in one or two cases. One was where somebody was just repeatedly posting the same thing over and over and over again, which was just tiresome, using almost the same words. So we dealt with that, and no one was chucked out permanently over this. We moderated stuff that we thought was over the line in terms of not adhering to the members' code of conduct, i.e. being respectful and so on. And those were really the criteria. Number one, might the comment lead to disciplinary action within the party? Well, thankfully, there were few, if any, comments like that. Secondly, did it breach the members' code of conduct? And we were pretty clear in what we said in the pinned text at the top as to the circumstances under which we would moderate. And mercifully, there were really very, very few cases where we actually had to moderate anything, which I think is testimony to how respectful and constructive, Liberal Democrats are in this sort of family that we're all in.
Sam, do you want to come in?
Well, yeah, for my sins, I'm one of the moderators of the Lib Dem Newbies group, which is about 7%. And this is a constant theme that comes back again and again, is where do you draw the line in terms of moderating those conversations, and to the point where we ended up having a second group so that we could have more constructive debate. Because, part of this is as well, if you've got new people who are getting used to the way that these things work, they need a bit more, not necessarily hand-holding, but I think it's worth having that thing of establishing them. And I think this debate goes beyond just that chat in the conference. There's so many groups across social media, and it's making sure that we have a consistent approach. And the work that Sal Brinton did, in terms of establishing that kind of pattern of, this is the tone of debate we would like to see in our internal discussions. That's been a real cornerstone for us in terms of being able to just kind of point to, this is how we're looking to encourage this type of debate. That setting that standard at the start. And I think you're right, Geoff, in terms of, you pointed to it at the start, and how we can do that across every platform and just have that consistency and approach is a really important thing. So there'll probably be lessons out of the conference chat that we can take across to other things as well, and then feed back in.
I think building on Sam's point there, and just bringing us back to some of the speeches from the platform. So thinking about moderating the chat, and I think most people would agree that the members' code of conduct is a very good place to start when looking at what is acceptable behaviour and what isn't for us as Liberal Democrats. And I wonder, Geoff, if it's worth asking you how you and colleagues think about people contributing to the debate, because I'm aware, particularly in one of the debates, there were some comments that didn't sit comfortably with some people. And I just wonder how you and colleagues think about that.
Yeah, this is a very difficult issue, and I think it's probably the most difficult issue that a conference chair will ever face. And you're sitting there on your own. Albeit the aides are with you, but it's your decision that counts as the chair. And we say to chairs, we will support you in the action you take, because otherwise chairs have to sit there basically not having confidence to take decisions. And it's quite an isolated position to be in. And when you're there listening to the comments and hearing what's said, it's very difficult sometimes to reach snap judgments on what's said and what isn't. On the one hand, you don't want to go in heavy-handed and stop people speaking. I mean, that's a really nuclear, draconian measure to take in a party that prides itself on free speech, because you're effectively shutting down a particular viewpoint. Then again, there are some viewpoints that need to be shut down because they're so grossly offensive or so obviously contrary to the members' code of conduct, or they're criminal in nature, and such as inciting racial hatred, which thankfully we didn't have any of, that you've got to take action. On the other hand, you don't want to have an outcome to a debate that's arrived at on a clear vote, but where people say afterwards, well, that was a one-sided debate because A, you didn't call anybody who had a particular point of view in that debate, or B, you shut everybody down who was making that point. And you know, we as Liberal Democrats do believe in the right of people to make their case within bounds. The question is where you draw those bounds, and that's a very difficult decision. And look, I'm not going to pretend I've got an answer to this. This is, I think, a debate that's going on in the wider society as much as it is in the Liberal Democrats. What are the limits of free speech? On the one hand, you don't want people to feel censored. On the other hand, you don't want people to have to listen to grossly offensive conduct that strikes at the very essence of who they are. You want people to feel as though conference is a good place for them to be. But then again, some cases that are mounted are uncomfortable to listen to, but they're legitimate. These are questions that we agonise about, and I'm not going to pretend there's any answer.
Some of my favourite debates have been ones that have been on sensitive issues. I remember whether that's all women shortlists, faith schools, or things like that, where people have sometimes very, very strong views and they're very close votes. You know, people are passionate about these things, and we want people with passion to make sure they feel they can have their voice. Can I move us on to the voting? Now, I had no issues whatsoever the whole time. There was never any issues, but there were some gripes about, the tab's not working. Was that, I mean, is that more user error, or was that Hopin struggling a little?
I don't think Hopin struggled. I mean, when we first started talking to Hopin back in April, May, the voting system wasn't in operation in that way. It wasn't possible to run votes limited to party members, and Hopin kindly made some changes to their software to accommodate us, and we started testing that in July. So it was really quite a close run thing. We were assured, and the stress testing that we did and Hopin did for us, we could be assured that only one person could vote once, so no logging in on multiple devices, and that the result held up and had integrity, and that was stress tested to quite a considerable degree. The difficulty that we faced was that we had to hold the voting open for 2 minutes, so it took quite a long time. I did take one vote on the question on whether to have a mini debate on a reference map that was shorter, and it quickly became apparent to me that a minute was too short, and so I mean that vote mattered less because, you know, the conference voted to hold a debate and then voted not to have a reference back, so nothing lost. But the difficulty we faced with Hopin was that depending on what browser you used and what your internet connection was like, your picture would sometimes run up to 30 seconds behind what was happening live in the studio. And so a chair would say, well, I'm going to open the vote now. So the vote would appear on the polls tab. But most people had the chat open, not the polls tab. So they didn't see it come up. And then if the picture's 30 seconds behind, you hear the chair say polls are opened. You click on the polls tab. If you have a minute of voting, you've only got 30 seconds left. And so if there's a glitch on your browser and you have to reset, you can lose the right to vote. So that's why we said 2 minutes. There were some local difficulties on some people's machines with having to refresh and so on. I think it's inevitable there will be some difficulties like that. But the one issue that we did have technical problems with was the vote on the Europe debate. And it wasn't a problem with the vote. It was a problem with the main central machine that we were using to run the vote, not updating from the Hopin back end. So effectively, I just had to go into the gallery get the back end figures which were available to the people logged in back there and just walk them through to the studio and announce it. And that was why there was that delay. It wasn't because the voting fell over or anything. It was just a case that the information wasn't available where we needed it. But it was.
We thought you were trying to raise tension. We, in our WhatsApp group, we thought he's taken lessons from X Factor or something and thought, let's just have a real big pause, build it up.
Yes, we'll say. And the result of that.
Go to an ad break. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The result of that vote conference will be after the break. No, mercy. The machine that we used to relay the results fell over, and so we had to go into another room and use the backup machine. But that was fine. We had that catered for. No, I'm really confident the voting held up actually. And yeah, there were some local glitches in terms of some machines not updating the people had, but overall, I think it was fine.
I think there were some fairly big gulps of wine being taken while in between votes being cast and the result being announced for that one, Geoff.
Good, yeah, and not by me, mercifully, but it certainly felt like I needed one afterwards, that's for sure.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, now that we've established it works, what does that mean for the future? Because I think, there's a lot of potential in this. And is that something that FCC is already thinking about? Or is that something you'll be thinking about in future? Or where do we go with it?
Yeah, look, we're not going to be able to go back to an in-person only event after this. Let's be realistic. We've managed to involve a vast number of people. We deliberately chose the opening titles we chose because they depicted pictures from across the country, as opposed to those who go to a physical conference. You see the Google Earth images as we center in on the conference center. This is far more broad-based, and we had so many people say to us, look, this is the first time I've been able to come. I can't get time off work, or it's too far to come, or whatever. So I think the days of purely in-person conferences without any remote participation are over. I think that's clear. What we do in the spring, well, that's something FCC is going to have to consider in the next few weeks. And at the minute, we've got a physical conference in York. We're going to have to consider very carefully what we do about that because, will the pandemic be over by then? Will it not? I mean, I'm not going to say too much about that because we haven't made a final decision yet. But what I am committed to now is that we, and I think the whole of FCC is committed, is that we're going to have to, even where we have physical conferences, have some sort of virtual element that allows people to input, because I don't think we can go back. I think this is one of those things, much like we don't want society to go back post-COVID to what it was like. I don't think our conference can go back to what it was like either. So one thing I will say, having just gone through an exercise that frankly I wasn't sure was even possible to do 3 months ago, I guess the same holds true now of a hybrid conference. How do you run a hybrid? How do you combine votes cast in a hall by a show of hands with votes cast digitally on a platform? Do we have to introduce smartphone app voting for the hall? How do we deal with people who don't have smartphones or who, for reasons of disability or other, aren't able to access that sort of technology? How do we not exclude people along the way? I mean, these are really difficult questions, and I think the party is going to have to come to grips with it. What I do know is that a hybrid conference is the most resource intensive of all, because you effectively get the cost of a physical event and a virtual event. And, the sort of money we spend on conferences is above my pay grade, literally. But we are committed to making sure that there's wider involvement. And you see it with the policy lab thing that FPC have run, which I think was a great success. We do really have to do better. And I, for one, am really so proud that we had a voting system at conference, that we could offer the full range of experiences in a way that, Labour didn't have any voting. I'd be surprised if the Tories have any voting. We managed it. And I'm really proud of that. And I don't think we can go back to normal times now. I think we're going to have to, and we should focus on ways of achieving greater involvement.
Just before I bring in Sam, I just want to raise something very, very quickly myself. So I think on one vote, I saw a progress bar of the vote actually happening. Of how now I don't know if that was a glitch and that wasn't supposed to happen. Because I'd like your thoughts on it, because I think personally, I quite like the fact when you didn't have the progress bar, so you didn't just go, oh, right, 80% of people are voting for this. Maybe I've understood this wrong. I'll just support it for that. I thought it almost forced me not to pay more attention to speakers. That's not the right way of phrasing it. But actually, there's no kind of, conformity bias in the voting because it was you didn't have a clue how it was going to go. It also made it very exciting for the Euro one because we had no idea which way it was going to come out. So before Sam comes in, I mean, will that be the norm that there will be no progress bar on voting?
Yeah, that will be the norm. We that was a glitch. There was a glitch on that vote. It's as simple as someone not checking a box when the poll was set up. It's as simple as that. We opted to hide the progress bar for precisely the reasons you said, John, because of confirmation bias. The idea that people are going to wait 2 minutes and then vote in accordance with the majority. We want people to vote according to their conscience about what they believe. We want the votes to reflect people's views, not what they think others are doing. So, that was a glitch. And in the future, those bars will be turned off for every vote, like they were at conference for all votes, bar that one where there was a mistake in the way it was keyed.
Sam.
Yeah, I was quite interested. You mentioned the policy lab, and for anyone who wasn't involved with that or didn't have the opportunity, it was an online policy platform where you got to suggest ideas and people would vote about what the best ideas were. And there was quite a lot of HQ involvement, and parliamentarians were able to come in and talk about issues. I'm interested in how much kind of the conference experience can be used to influence the pre-conference stuff, because we have this great thing in our party where we talk about everyone gets to vote and develop policy that way, but actually, like, all those policies, bar voting on the amendments and deciding what's going through, that's all decided way before conference. And I think it's really important to get more people involved at that stage, so that people have a much more of an opportunity not just to vote on a policy, but actually to bring that through in the first place and get those ideas. So is there a way of taking that kind of conference experience and the hop-in technology and using that to facilitate mini conferences on specific issues, that kind of thing, to really get people involved in developing policy?
Yeah, there's an awful lot of really exciting stuff that we can do here now, because our hop-in license lasts for a year. So, when we've thought about spring and dealt with that, I think there will be a sort of new normal in terms of policy. And I know the Federal Policy Committee are working on this very much. Policy Lab was their initiative, and you're right, we can be far more consultative in the party. I've got to say, I thought some of the best sessions that we had were the consultative sessions, because that was where the chat came into its own, in that you had people in the studio and remote, and you could literally, if you were chairing it, sit there and see somebody put something on the chat and then ask the spokesperson right away. And that's a really good thing, rather than having to put questions in by a deadline 3 weeks out that's then pre-sifted by a committee and then asked in a publication that might or might not get asked then on conference floor. I think we can be a lot more immediate, a lot more nimble, and a lot more spontaneous, and perhaps have debate flowing in a much more organic and a natural way than we've had in the past. I think it does present some really quite exciting opportunities for us now in a democratic member organisation.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the things that I'm really excited to talk about is that sort of there have been so many constraints on what we can do with conference that sort of all come from the amount of time we have. And I think the consultation is one of them, but then, also the amount of policy that we get through. Because all of our policy has to be voted on by the members, which, I completely support. We ended up in these sort of slightly bizarre positions where we have, a policy that's quite out of date, but there's a year before we manage to get something through, find time at conference to update it. And, meanwhile, we're paying, tens of thousands for an auditorium so that 10 people and a dog can debate, the Liberal Democrats still love trains, F33. And it just, it's not a good use of resources, and it holds, it's frustrating because I think it holds the party back. And I think particularly problematic, and I think perhaps as sort of Sam was alluding to, is when you have you've got a big policy that's, maybe an education policy went through a year ago, and you want to bring something that's kind of a small change to an education policy, and the FCC is never going to accept that for debate because it's a terrible use of the auditorium that we're paying thousands for, and that's entirely reasonable. But that means that you basically can often only get something through conference if it's suitable for an emergency motion, or if you're able to put the time and energy into developing an enormous new policy, which most members aren't going to have the time for. And I suppose, so the question is that time constraint something that we can lift using this technology? And are there ways that we can be more nimble and creative in thinking about how we think of conference. So instead of conference being something that happens twice a year, can conference be something that we have, in as well as having twice a year? I don't think anybody wants to get rid of spring or autumn conference. But, is it something that can happen in sort of bite size? I don't know, maybe people do want to, that was quite an assertion. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but, is it something that can happen sort of in bite sized chunks through the year as well, either through sort of the odd weekend or through regular evenings? Maybe we have like mini conference one evening a month. Are there those kind of possibilities, and are those being considered?
Yes, there certainly are those possibilities. I wouldn't say they're being considered at this point, largely because the tech is so new and we've only just done it. But it does present some really interesting opportunities. At the moment, the party constitution says 2 conferences, one in the autumn, one in the spring. But I think now is very much the time for us to be debating those first principles throughout the party. And what we need is that sort of broad-based debate. It's really interesting about time in the auditorium, and sometimes our expectations are confounded. You can have what appears to be a straightforward motion on, I don't know, for example, federalism, which was designed to deal with the Welsh and Scottish elections, and then all of a sudden, you find that things come up that take the debate in a different direction in the form of amendments or not in that particular case. And I've seen many a motion that I thought was uncontroversial become really controversial when a particular amendment goes in. And we have to really try and look into our crystal balls to see how things are going to go. So, there are certainly, I think, all sorts of opportunities and possibilities here.
I think one thing I'd say is that one of the problems with the Lib Dems is not that we don't have enough policy. And I think for me, the auditorium experience, it was clear that an awful lot of thought had been put into the auditorium, how debates were going to work, how we were going to make sure speakers could speak, how the tech was working, how the voting was working. And for lots of people, conference, they don't go in the auditorium at all. Conference for them isn't about policy. They want somebody else to take care of policy. For them, it's all about campaigning, or it's about, for some, it's a commercial endeavour. It's about the exhibition. It's about the fringe. And I wonder if Geoff, that was something you felt as well, that lots of effort had been put into the auditorium and maybe the other areas were less focused upon.
Yeah, it's a fair point. We did plough the lion's share of our preparation into the auditorium. Firstly, because it was the most high-risk area. If the votes go wrong on a controversial motion, like, for example, rights for trans people in one of our last debates, then that would have been or over Europe, and that would have been of serious concern. And we really wanted the auditorium to reflect people's experiences of conference, so that when people tuned in, they recognised the forms of words we were using. Will X stand by, and I now call whatever. And that the set looked familiar, that we had the lectern. It was why I did that little tour at the start, because we wanted people to feel reassured. And it was nice to see Karen Lindsay say on LibDem Voice, it was faintly comforting to see a familiar face, and the familiar props and the familiar setup. So we did focus a huge amount of work on that. Our fringes, I think, bar a couple of technical glitches, worked well. We had greater fringe footfall than we're used to, and there were no more people crowding in the back, not being able to get a glass of wine. You're standing at the side and someone's barging past you to the buffet. He's turned up late and then he's stuck in the front row. You can't get out. I do think the exhibition needed more work in retrospect, actually. I think the exhibition suffered from a lack of footfall in some places. I think we could have done more to plug it. I think the forum lent itself less well to a virtual exhibition, because you don't have that sort of sense of meandering round, something catching your eye and so on. So I think if we do this in the future, we're going to have to, I think, put more work into the exhibition and probably some of the fringes, because I do recognise those areas, I think, were a less positive experience for people in the auditorium.
For listeners and viewers who might not know, and I'm really interested in your opinion on this, Geoff, as a seasoned conference chair, how would you have dealt with Donald Trump and Joe Biden last night? This is the thing. I would love to know how you think you could have dealt with that sort of interrupting from someone.
Well, it's just discourteous, isn't it? It's discourteous and it's ill-mannered, and it just shows what happens when you get a cacophony. Because I don't know about you, I think it generated far more heat than light, if I'm honest. And I just wouldn't tolerate. I mean, look, who knows who can control those candidates, particularly Donald Trump. I just don't. I'm not sure that's even possible. But I think if it were me, I'd be wanting to impose some ground rules. We don't talk over each other. You respond to the point made. You just adopt, dare I say it, the Lib Dem Members Code of Conduct, which I think deals with all of these rules in triplicate, and that's what you do. But look, some things are very, very difficult to do. But I am proud in the Lib Dems. I've had the privilege to chair some of the more difficult debates in the past. Israel Palestine and the Digital Bill of Rights and other sorts of things, and the supporters and members debate we had in the not so distant past. And overall, you have really hard fought debates, but people are good natured about it, and they respect the norms of debate, and that's something I think that's a source of pride in the party. And just before I go, I thank you for your warm words about the conference. I should say that this was an enormous team effort, not least by all the staff in HQ who really put in 180% to make it work. Some of them working hours that we shouldn't ask any staff member to work, and the FCC and the other committees as well really did help. So it was a real broad-based team effort there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Geoff, for coming on the podcast. Thank you to Lisa and Laura for coming on as regular contributors. Thank you to Sam, but unfortunately we have a rule. Anyone that speaks too much sense will not be invited back. So this is Sam's last appearance on the podcast, and he definitely won't be back. But no, thank you all our viewers and listeners for watching. Do go on and respond to the consultation regarding the conference. Like I say, the more information they get, the more little niggles that can be ironed out. And it is an opportunity for the party to really take this technology and use it to improve lots of functions within the party going forward. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Do subscribe to our podcast so you can make sure you don't miss any episodes. We have some absolute corkers coming out soon. You can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at LibDem Pod, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.